Students, now let us have a look at colonialism and nationalism in Africa and learn about Nigeria. British colonialism and the making of a nation.
Just like in other parts of the world, the concept of nation-state was new, even to the countries of Africa.
It was the tribal identities that bound the people in these areas. The colonizers brought certain areas under their control.
All of us are familiar with the country of Nigeria on the west coast in Africa. This country was actually created by the British by uniting distinct regions inhabited by different tribal groups around the Niger River system. While the northern Nigeria is inhabited mostly by Hausa Fulani people who are predominantly Muslims, the southeastern part is dominated by the Igbo tribes. The southwestern area is dominated by the Yoruba tribes. The southern areas continue to be dominated mostly by Christians as a result of the missionary activity in the region. Students, if we look at modern Nigeria, its history is filled with the conflicts between the northern, southeastern and southwestern regions amid struggle for building a common democratic political system.
The legacy of colonialism continued with European control of natural resources, especially petroleum.
The region of River Niger, one of the most populous countries of Africa, suffered from various kinds of colonial rule. If you look at this place from the 16th century, it was a major source of slaves for America. The tribal peasants were captured from the interior and sold to European slave traders. The abolition of slave trade in 19th century led to interests in trade in agricultural produce like palm oil and cocoa in these areas. In 1861, the British established their rule over the coastal areas and developed Lagos as a major center of administration, trade and education in West Africa. This place also became a center of resistance to colonialism and emergence of Pan-Africanism and Nigerian nationalism.
However, in the late 19th and 20th centuries, there was a comeback of racism in the British colonial empire.
As a result, the educated Africans were excluded from the civil services, and there was a discrimination against the African entrepreneurs. During the same time, the colonial authorities depended on promoting the tribal chiefs and the elite and giving them greater control over the people.
The colonial policy helped in promoting modern education and administrative modernization in the south, while it also allowed the pre-modern traditions to continue in the northern part. Over the century, this widened the regional disparities and the north failed to develop a modern educated social class.
In the year 1939, the British too separated the Yoruba and Igbo regions of Nigeria into western and eastern Nigeria and encouraged competition and conflict between the three tribal groups so that they could divide and rule the country.
As a response, a part of Western educated intellectuals promoted the idea of common Nigerian nation and began to fight against the British rule.
Herbert Macaulay founded the Nigerian National Democratic Party (NNDP) in 1923, which was the first Nigerian political party. The NNDP succeeded in winning all the seats in elections that were held in 1923, 1928 and 1933. In the 1930s, Macaulay also encouraged militant attacks on the British colonial government. In the year 1936, the Nigerian Youth Movement (NYM), founded by Nnamdi Azikiwe, appealed to all the Nigerians irrespective of their cultural background.
This quickly developed into a powerful political movement.
In the year 1945, Macaulay and Azikiwe agreed to form the National Council of Nigeria and the Cameroons, the NCNC. Azikiwe gradually became the dominant Nigerian nationalist leader who supported Pan-Africanism and Pan-Nigerian-based nationalist movement. The Nigerian nationalism changed and became popular and powerful in the post-World War II period as Nigeria faced difficult times. The Nigerian soldiers who returned after fighting for the British in the World War and the trade union leaders served as the backbone of the movement. The radical nationalist trade unionists organized a national general strike in 1945.
Nigerian nationalism students had two tasks to deal with. One was to fight the British, and the other was uniting the very diverse and conflicting ethnic groups. The national movement was stronger in the more developed southern region than in the north, which resulted in a north-south divide. In the south also, the nationalism was affected by the ethnic conflict between the Yoruba and Igbos.
By the 1950s, there were anti-colonial movements by the regional parties in all the three regions. While the Conservative Northern People's Congress or the NPC led the movement in the north, the National Council for Nigeria and the Cameroons or the NCNC led the movement in the east. The Active Group or AG was the regional party in the west.
As the nationalism increased, the British decided to give away the power to the Nigerians and came out with a complex federal system that recognized the autonomy of the three major regions.
On the 1st October 1963, Nigeria became independent. But the nation could not come up with a just and democratic balance, and eventually Nigeria faced a civil war and military rule, which resulted in the strengthening of the domination of the north.
There were a lot of steps that were taken to bring in civilian and democratic government, but they failed repeatedly.
There was corruption and suppression of human rights, along with collaboration between the military regime and multinational oil corporations who funded the corrupt rulers.
After a long rule of military dictatorship, the Nigerians elected a democratic government in the year 1999.
In the 1950s, oil was discovered in the Niger Delta, and soon many multinational companies headed by the Dutch Shell Company acquired rights for oil drilling in the region. Nigeria continues to be the source of oil. Most of the oil wells are owned by the corporations that have extracted Nigerian oil and shared profits with the military rulers, while the common man did not receive any benefits. Moreover, rampant oil extraction without following safety measures by the foreign oil companies resulted in damages to the coastal environment. The oil spills from the oil wells had a drastic influence on the ecosystem. As a result, large areas of mangrove forests were damaged. An estimated 5 to 10% of mangrove ecosystem in Nigeria was wiped out due to settlement or oil. The spills resulted in contamination of groundwater and soils, which affected crops and aquacultures.
In addition, the drinking water is also contaminated repeatedly, and a shine of oil is visible in many water bodies. Although the drinking water may not have immediate health effects, the number of hydrocarbons and chemicals present in the oil tend to cause cancer. The oil spills that happen offshore are much greater in scale and contaminate the coastal environment, which cause a decrease in the fishing production locally.
All through 1900s, there was increased unrest of people, especially in the Niger Delta region, where the different ethnic groups began to demand for compensation for the ecological damage being done in the years and for control over the oil resources of the land. Actually, the unrest began as a peaceful activist organization and united the members on the basis of ethnicity. The movement reached a critical stage in 1900 when Ken Saro-Wiwa, an eminent human rights activist and environmentalist, was killed by the military government in spite of the international protests.
Students, this was how various countries experienced liberation movements that gifted them with independence. In the next class, let us learn about the national movement in India and the partition and the independence.